Imagine waking up tomorrow. You open the curtains. The sun is there, but it doesn't shine. The light is weak, like it's filtered through smoke. The sky isn't blue, it's pale, gray, thin. You step outside and feel it instantly. Something is wrong. At noon, shadows barely exist. Faces look washed out, colors feel dead, and the strangest part, it doesn't go away. A day passes, then a week. The light never fully returns. Summer arrives, but the warmth never does. The air stays cold, not chilly, cold enough to make people quiet. Crops start failing, not all at once, just enough to make food more expensive, just enough to make people worried. Then livestock weakens, markets slow down, trade becomes uncertain, and fear spreads faster than information. Some say God is angry, some say it's the end of days, some say nothing at all, because there is nothing to say. No enemy, no war, no invader, only the sky, turning strange. This was real. In the year 536 AD, the world dimmed. And what followed was not just a hard year, but the beginning of a decade of collapse. The first detailed account came from the Byzantine historian Procopius. He was not writing mythology. He was documenting war, politics, and daily life under Emperor Justinian. And in the middle of those records, he wrote something strange. The sun gave forth its light without brightness, like the moon. He was describing midday, not an eclipse, not a passing storm, but a persistent dimness that refused to lift. The world looked faded. In Italy, the Roman statesman Cassiodorus wrote letters to provincial officials trying to address growing anxiety. He described a sun deprived of its usual splendor. He mentioned shadows that seemed weak, cold winds during what should have been warm seasons, harvest cycles that no longer behaved normally. His tone was controlled, measured, but beneath it there was uncertainty. He did not know what he was explaining. Centuries later, the Syriac chronicler Michael the Syrian preserved earlier records stating, "The sun became dark, and its darkness lasted for 18 months. 18 months, not a single failed season, not a brief anomaly, a year and a half of weakened light." In China, imperial court records mention frost during summer and widespread crop failures. In the Irish annals, historians wrote simply, "A failure of bread." No dramatic language, no cosmic interpretation, just scarcity. When writers across Europe, the Middle East, and Asia describe the same dim sky within the same year, it stops being rumor. It becomes evidence. Something entered the atmosphere in 536, and everyone beneath that sky felt it. For centuries, historians questioned the accounts. Was it exaggeration, religious symbolism, fear shaping memory? Then modern science began to test the past. Ice cores drilled from Greenland preserved layers of atmosphere frozen in time. In those layers, dated precisely to 536 AD, scientists found volcanic sulfate particles. Not speculation, physical residue. Tree ring data across Europe and Asia tells the same story. In normal years, trees grow steadily, forming wide rings. Between 536 and the early 540s, those rings narrow dramatically. Growth slows when temperatures fall, and reconstructions suggest global temperatures dropped by as much as 1.5 to 2 degrees Celsius. Today, 2 degrees dominates global climate debates. In the 6th century, it meant survival. Agriculture depended entirely on predictable seasons. A shorter growing season meant weaker harvests. Weaker harvests meant hunger, and hunger spreads quietly. No explosion, no battlefield, just empty storage rooms. Livestock suffered as well. Colder temperatures reduced grazing capacity. Trade routes slowed as surplus vanished. When societies live harvest to harvest, even a small disruption becomes dangerous. Multiple independent climate studies, including work analyzing dendrochronology and polar ice chemistry, now confirm that 536 marks one of the coldest decades in the last 2,000 years. The darkness described by chroniclers was not imagination. It left measurable scars in wood and ice. The sky changed, and the earth responded. There is still no absolute verdict, no single smoking crater that historians can point to with certainty, only evidence, layer by layer. One of the strongest hypotheses points north to Iceland. Chemical analysis of sulfate deposits found in Greenland ice cores suggests a volcanic eruption in the northern hemisphere, an eruption powerful enough to inject massive quantities of aerosols into the stratosphere. When that happens, sunlight is reflected back into space. The planet cools, harvests suffer, and skies appear dim. Another theory looks west, to the Ilopango volcano in present-day El Salvador. Geological research indicates a major eruption around the 6th century. Some radiocarbon dating aligns closely with the mid-50s. If Ilopango erupted at full force, it could have had global atmospheric consequences. There is also growing discussion among researchers that it may not have been one eruption, but multiple events within a short period. Layered shocks, compound cooling. Earlier scholars once proposed a comet or meteor impact, but that theory has far less geological support today. What matters is not which mountain erupted. What matters is scale. Whatever entered the atmosphere in 536 was powerful enough to dim the sun across continents. And when the sky changes, civilizations feel it. But the atmosphere was only the beginning, because 5 years later, something far deadlier began to spread. In 541 AD, just 5 years after the skies darkened, another catastrophe arrived. This time, it did not come from the atmosphere. It came through the ports. Under the reign of Justinian I, the Byzantine Empire was powerful, wealthy, and expanding. Constantinople was one of the largest cities in the world, with a population estimated between 400,000 and 500,000 people. It was dense, it was connected, it was vulnerable. Ships arriving from Egypt carried grain. They also carried rats. And on those rats lived fleas infected with a bacterium, Yersinia pestis. The disease likely began in Central Asia, traveling along trade routes before reaching the Mediterranean. When it reached Constantinople, it moved quickly. The historian Procopius described streets filled with corpses. He wrote that at the peak of the outbreak, as many as 10,000 people were dying per day in the capital alone. Modern historians debate that number, but even conservative estimates suggest catastrophic mortality. Across multiple waves between 541 and the mid-8th century, the plague may have killed between 25 and 50 million people. Some regions lost up to 40% of their population. Labor shortages followed. Fields went unharvested. Tax revenues collapsed. Military recruitment suffered. Mass graves became necessary. Procopius described bodies stacked in towers when burial space ran out. There was no understanding of bacteria, no knowledge of contagion. Many believed the plague was divine punishment. Religious processions filled the streets. Prayer became policy. The emperor himself reportedly fell ill, though he survived. The empire endured, but it was weakened in ways that could not be easily repaired. Ambitions of reconquest slowed. Infrastructure suffered. Demographic scars lasted for generations. The darkness of 536 had destabilized the system. The plague finished what the climate began, and the Mediterranean world entered a new era, not with a battle, but with absence. Between 536 and the mid-540s, the Mediterranean world endured a sequence of crises that fed into one another. First, the sky dimmed, then harvests weakened. Then famine spread quietly across regions already dependent on fragile supply chains. And just as societies attempted to stabilize, the plague arrived. The reign of Justinian I had been marked by ambition. He sought to restore the former glory of the Roman Empire. His armies had reclaimed parts of North Africa and Italy, but war requires manpower, and manpower requires population. The plague reduced both. Tax systems faltered as entire communities vanished. Agricultural productivity dropped for years. Military campaigns slowed. In some regions, recovery took decades. Historians debate the long-term geopolitical consequences. Some argue that the weakening of the Byzantine Empire during this period contributed to its reduced capacity to resist later external pressures. Others caution against drawing direct lines of causation. What is clear is this: demographic collapse reshapes societies. When labor becomes scarce, economies restructure. When food supply becomes unstable, migration increases. When populations shrink dramatically, political power shifts. This was not a dramatic collapse in a single moment. It was erosion, slow, relentless. The Mediterranean did not fall in 1 year, but after 536 and the plague that followed, it was no longer the same world. History remembers explosions. It remembers sieges. It remembers men on horses and cities in flames. But 536 has no iconic battlefield, no legendary final stand, no conqueror to blame. It was not a war. It was the sky, a dimming that lasted long enough to weaken the foundations of entire societies. Then a bacterium, invisible and silent, moved through trade routes and crowded streets. There is something unsettling about disasters without faces. We prefer stories with villains, with decisions, with responsibility, but 536 offers none of that. It was climate, it was disease, it was systems breaking quietly under pressure. Perhaps that is why it is rarely mentioned. It does not fit neatly into a dramatic narrative. There is no single-day historians can point to and say, "Here, this is when everything changed." Instead, it was gradual, a year of weakened sunlight, a decade of instability, a generation marked by absence. And maybe that is more frightening than a sudden collapse, because erosion does not announce itself. It does not shout. It fades. And when people live through slow decline, they often do not realize history is shifting beneath their feet. For more than a year, the sun dimmed, harvests failed, temperatures dropped. Then disease followed, and within a single decade, millions were gone. Not because of a war, not because of an invading army, but because systems that seemed stable proved fragile. Today, We like to believe we are insulated from that kind of collapse. We have satellites, global logistics, medical science, real-time communication, but we also live in tightly connected systems. Supply chains stretch across continents. Food production depends on predictable climate patterns. Urban populations rely on constant distribution of resources. If a major volcanic eruption injected enough aerosols into the atmosphere tomorrow, reducing sunlight across the northern hemisphere, how long would stability hold? Weeks? Months? Would fear move faster than information? Would governments respond in time? 536 reminds us of something uncomfortable. Civilizations do not always fall to swords. Sometimes they dim slowly. Sometimes they weaken quietly. And sometimes the greatest turning points in history arrive not with noise, but with silence.